Great.
And let me start by quickly introducing Florian Köhl, who's the founder of Fatkoehl Architects, a Berlin-based studio founded in 2002.
Raphael,
Yes.
one quick thing. So we will share this. So Christian, I will do a part, and Christian will do a part.
Ah, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And then, as I understand it, the premise of your studio has been focusing on promoting or understanding new methods of housing or new typologies of housing that can basically break the monotony that was happening at the early 2000s with the housing market in Berlin or Germany in that sense. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yes.
And Christian Burkhard has been working with Florian, and Christian is actually an economist by training. So I think it's a very interesting collaboration that you guys have going on. That I think maybe we should get more into that in the question and answers, because I want to know more about how that potentially influences these new typologies that you guys investigate. And together they co-founded Quest in 2016, which is a research and design, basically they call it an outfit, which focuses on architecture for urban communities. Okay, so they'll be sharing the presentation. As Florian mentioned, he'll do part of it, and then Christian will do part of it, and then at the end we can have a conversation, question and answer. So pay attention. I'm going to quiz you guys after as well. Yeah. Okay, so without further ado, I think the floor is yours, and we can start. I'll mute my mic in order to give better feedback on the sound. Okay, go ahead.
What I learned, Raphael, yesterday is that it will record everything you say in your microphone as well. That's interesting. So on top of what I say, everything else in your space will be recorded. Even if you put it on mute, at least in my application.
Okay. We'll try just to see if it helps.
Yeah, maybe you have to disconnect your mic and then connect it again.
All right.
This is what happened. Oh, anyway, you have an internal mic. Okay, I will start. Okay,
all right.
Thank you very much for the virtual invitation. So this we agreed that this is a chance that we could have more exchange about different works, and Raphael has been in our studio last week, and so we coming back, and what I show you here is the plan du bassin of Corbusier, and I show it because it's when I looked at it and I looked at Berlin, I saw there's a somehow it looks familiar to what happened, but in this drawing, Corbusier had the idea that there should be a sort of new type of living, a new type of city, a sort of new start in the modern time after the war. This is still before the war, but there was the idea that there would be a completely new typology, a new way of using space, and he would compare it to the existing Paris, to the very European sort of grown city structure. And I will talk about 3 projects in Berlin that we did in our office, and Christian will talk about 2 other projects also in Berlin. So you can imagine that a reason to be here in Berlin, to have the office here, is also that there seem to be a lot of opportunities. This is a view from 1957. On the left side, you see someone hanging in a steel bowl, taking a picture of the first building exhibition after the war, on a site in Berlin where all the old structure has been taken away in a similar way as Corbusier has seen this in the 20s. And they invited a lot of international architects to kind of push ideas of housing, push ideas of urban structure, urban fabric in Berlin Also, since Berlin has been destroyed heavily through the Second World War in the last half year of the war, so there was also an opportunity to kind of reconstruct the city, rethink the city. And this was one answer to it. On the right-hand side, you see the east. You see the Stalin in the type of Stalin type, from Russia imported ideas of housing, also of sizes, of scale. So there is a sort of parallel world since Berlin has been divided after the war in the West, which is the French sector, the English sector, and the American sector, on the East, which is the Russian sector. And because the Allies, the war Allies, had shared somehow divided Germany, but they said we need to divide Berlin to have access. And so this is a view of the building exhibition in 1957 called Interbau, and you can see already there were Dutch people funded, Broek Bakhema, but also Niemeyer, a German architect, but who worked mainly in Brazil, and Eiermann, German architect, but Alto from Scandinavia. So there is a sort of range of architects and also a huge range of different ways of living. So this was the first really innovative moment, and the second one in terms of pushing architecture was another building exhibition in the 87, and you can see this building exhibition is much more about the existing fabric and the question not to kind of rebuild the city as a sort of modernist plan, but also think about what is the existing fabric and how could we engage with the existing fabric. So it has been a huge competition. Both projects were also about social housing, so this is a parallel idea of making architecture, making city, but also producing models of housing supported from the government. And here you see one project from this second IBA is from one of the early projects from OMA, where they made a new at Checkpoint Charlie. So this is the one of the most important transfers between the East Berlin and West Berlin, and this was the place where the trucks would go underneath the building, and just when it has been finished, the wall came down. So it's existing, but it's not a border anymore. But at the same time, and that is interesting, in the second exhibition there was also a strong movement of participation, of political activism, also in terms of who owns the city, who owns the place. So there was an IBA, International Building Exhibition, about new projects, but also about existing projects. And there was a sort of fight for the rights of the city, which still exists, and which exists now even more again because of rising rents. So there was another building exhibition in parallel that would really try to work with different models of taking over existing structures, and also thinking about rent models, thinking about sharing spaces, new habitations. And in this tradition, we came to Berlin in a phase, and I started my office in a phase where all this was a bit over, and the boom in Berlin was also over. So 2000, in the turn of the millennium, there was more or less no work. But what you can see here, you can see a map where you see all these red dots. What we learned is that there were all these empty sites. This is the east part of the city. So the yellow line is the former border. So this is the west part, and this is all the east part called Mitte and Prenzlauer Berg. And we realized all these red dots are empty sites. And so we thought maybe one way could be to become an entrepreneur in a way, as an architect, a developer, a financer, and also make the design, also think about the use, and do everything ourselves. And somehow we we had the chance to get a site. So you see this is the site. It's a firewall on each side, so you can build all the way to the edges. And we bought this site ourselves, privately. We realized already it's a very interesting place with the view to the TV tower. We knew that the space would have potential, and so we started to think about a building that would exist there. And the only way that we could build this building was not through the model of getting a bank and they would just pay it. They said we don't take any more risks in Berlin, but only through finding a group of people that would become the investors. So each team that would move into this building would also become an investor. And what we thought is that, so that would allow us to really think about very different program, very different types of flats, but it would also allow us to think about other ideas of relationships to the city. And we realized that this is the most crucial part of these projects. It's not only about the private space, it's also about the relationship to the city, to the public space. And what you can see on the left is the view that you just get for free, but they wouldn't allow us to make any balconies on this side of the street. And so we decided, okay, then maybe this is a very interesting question. Could we still open the place to this street? And somehow we developed these kind of temporary balconies that you could unfold into the walls, but they would also make the building start to talk, and they would make a very strong relationship to the street as well, from the outside to the inside. But also it would allow us to have as you can see here, from the bottom to the ceiling, we could have this opening. And we also thought about what are the potentials of each side. So you see the southwest side now with the amazing view, and we thought this side should be very open. It should have large windows and it should have these balconies. So you have, of course, you have each side, you use the potential of each side, and the building appears to be very different on both sides. And then, of course, there's a question of how complex can it become? What can you offer with the place, not only in terms of what the building looks like, but also in terms of possibility of usage. So what you can see here is different types of flat typologies, but also the idea that you could also work in the building. So when you take it apart, you realize this is the potential. And it made from this either spaces, flats when they didn't really, were not very interested in walls. They would really like to share one big space, or other flats where we had 2 floors, very narrow flats, but then a very tight program. So you see here the bottom, which is very tight, very complex, and on the top you see a very open space. And this model allowed us to work quite individually with each person that would move into this place, because they would not only be our client in terms of design, but also they would share the risk of the project, because they would pay their own share. So the relationship to the whole building process and also to the place is very different. And you see, sometimes you're very lucky, and you can even make a bath that I couldn't imagine. So this is a very strong collaboration with the client, and rather than having a typical bath, this is the bathtub, this is the shower, and this is the toilet behind this column. And if you want to get a drink from the kitchen, that's possible, because you can just open it. And so we moved on to projects where we were part of a whole team. This is a whole block that we changed into with a similar model of the Baugemeinschaft. We call it Baugemeinschaft. So it's like a group of people that would build together a building. They all become mini investors. We also try to really change the relationship of architecture towards the city, because usually if you build within one of these blocks, it's only a question about facade. We always try to make the building very three-dimensional. So here you see the lift running through the building, and it runs behind this flat. So this floor can become one big flat, or it can be divided here, and you can walk around the staircase core. And so again, here we got very different typologies of flats, but also we got very different views to the street, and also the people who will come across the building will have very different relationships to the building while coming across. And obviously these kind of moving back and forwards of these volumes would also allow us to have different typologies of flats. And the third building is a building where now we have seen a block. Before we have seen a single building. This is a building which is a completely freestanding structure, and it's on a very interesting spot in the, also more or less in the center of Berlin, the edge to Kreuzberg. So again, it's the edge between the east and the west. And you see the river Spree, and the project is called Spreefeld, and you can see it's a quite deep site. So this is a site which used to be for textile industries, and so they would need a lot of space to dry all the textiles, and they needed a lot of water. So the biggest problem for these projects was the access to the project, because only with the access it would allow to get a building permission. And only because we had a very interesting team of risk-taking developers, not the very typical developers, we said, okay, we take this risk, we will manage this street to become a public street. And so we could get the site for quite a good price to make affordable housing. And you can see what is interesting is these spaces are the sort of intermediate spaces, that rest spaces, leftovers from the time when the wall was up. And in that time, in that period, a lot of the sites have been not developed. So they are still sites either from the bombings of the war, or they're sites that have never been filled up. And then it became this beach through a bar. And this would be a typical situation after the wall came down, that you would take over these spaces and live there in a way. Very informal. So we thought we should keep that kind of character. This is the strength of the city. And at the same time, we should change the character. So here you can see our project, these three buildings. It's a very open plan, open towards the river. So not to close it towards the river, and open towards the city, but also with the idea to really make this whole stretch along the river public, which the city didn't really intend. And we pushed hard to say this should be a really public space. And as a consequence, we would say, okay, we also keep all the ground floor public and make this relationship to the city strong. So here you see the plan, and you can see it's a very inviting plan or layout, but also at the same time it makes a sort of intermediate space in the middle, and allows every building to have a relationship either to the river or to have a relationship to the south. So you see up here is north. And you see, this is the situation just, I think, maybe a month ago. And I tried to, I had the third photographer, and I asked him, can you take a picture which shows the kind of building and at the same time all the plants And the only moment we could really get this is the moment where the leaves are just coming out. So we were waiting for half a year for this moment to take this picture. And you see, typically it's completely filled with plants, and you wouldn't see the buildings. It's very difficult to see them. And that was the plan, that we would not take away the plants. And how we did this, I will show you in a minute. And to make the ground floor public, we decided that we need to be really clear about the program, because you cannot make a space public without somehow making it alive through the program. Otherwise, people will not feel comfortable in the space. So on the left side, in the blue area, you see very flexible units for any kind of work. And on the right side, you see a yellow space. This is a space that we call optional space, a space that we haven't finished. We have left it open because the corporation wanted to finish it themselves, to use it for very different uses, you will see. So this is now the moment where you come into the project, and you can also hear, we have these crows here. I guess you can hear them, but I can't close my window at the moment. It's broken, so you have to live with all these birds in the background. But on the right-hand side, you can see this is the kindergarten. It's a private kindergarten that it's a public kindergarten, but we offered the space for it. And on the left side, you see all the program also here. So the kindergarten is very active until 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. The offices are active until 7, 8 o'clock, and then the optional spaces start to be active. So there's a 24-hour activity, including all the people going home and going out and whatever. And also here you see one of the optional spaces. So on each building, there is on the corner is this space. And here's another one. And you can see what is interesting is that space has been taken over by the inhabitants of the project. In the first space, they made a workshop, wood workshop, in order to build the spaces and also to build all the furniture. And now it's a wood workshop that is used by people from the city. You can rent it, or you can do things there, workshops. And there's another space, 3 of them, but this one is a particular space because it's a space where you can eat. You have a kitchen, a small kitchen, and a professional kitchen in the background. And you can rent it to do workshops, projects, and either use the kitchen yourself, very simple, very cheap, very easy, or you can hire the service, and then you don't have to do anything, but you just pay for it. And the interesting thing is that these spaces are already included in the rent, so they can curate them in any way they like. But what I think is interesting, it's an offer to make. They want to be also curators of the city by offering space. And what else did we do to make this project look like it looks? We thought to make affordable housing, we have to reduce the staircases, but also make the staircase an open staircase that would help us. On one hand, it helps us to connect. To a shared garden for each house, because the whole ground floor is public, so you need some private space. But also the openness would allow us to have a safety staircase. And so we don't need the fire brigade to come in, and we can keep all the trees. And here you can see it's a part of the experience that you make when you walk up. You have these views. Even if you live on the ground floor, you can walk up there and go on one of these terraces, which you can see here. And also you have these very big vertical gardens. That is the super private garden to each flat. So you compensate for not having the ground floor as your garden. You put the garden next to your place. And we also thought, as we had to make very affordable housing, so we had to think, how can we make cheap windows? And this is a project that we did with 2 other offices. So it's a collaboration of 3 offices plus the alternative developer. So we thought we developed together a catalog of windows that are affordable, but they should do as much as possible for us. So the first thing is that the access to these balconies, but also they make the space transparent, and they allow people, when you sit, and you sit a lot of time, also to have a view outside, to have always a strong relationship to the public space. So that's what you see here. And at the same time, we could use these windows in a very free way on each building. So each of the offices would, at the end, plan one of the buildings with these kind of catalog stuff. But then I could choose it. This is the building I designed. I could choose this in the way I liked it to be chosen. And then you see, this is maybe what Raphael said before about the question, what does it generate? It generates the possibility to really test out new typologies. So what you see here, we just talked about the ground floor, about different uses. The blue stuff is all the working areas, and the yellow stuff, the option spaces. This is almost 20% of the project is about work. And then you see the orange stuff, which is about 20%, 25% of the project, of the surface, is shared flats, cluster flats, flats where you live together and you share things, and the other 55%, 74%, sorry, or more or less 47%, so a bit less than half, is flats that are used individually. And you can see, if you want to achieve such a variety of typologies, such a large scale of difference from very, very small to very large, you have to really think about what is the structure that you put there that is still architectural. And so we had to reduce the amount of columns, concrete, and also the amount of shear walls to the minimum. We also reduced the footprint, CO2 footprint, by just making the main structure in concrete, and this is timber. And then we made these kind of 5 types of bathrooms that you could just shift between the shafts. So we only have 6 shafts, and we shift everything in between the shafts to make this to allow this variety of flats. And you can see this is a sort of one catalog of possibilities of flat options. So this is about 42 options, but there are more typologies. But you can see already that it's a very flexible idea of varieties. So here you have like a set where the clients could start to develop the flats with us. So here you see the bathrooms, the wall types, and then this is the main structure. And you could either take a very empty flat that you fill up and make it look like this, including you could also order a cat. Or you would decide, because I can't even afford to live in a place like you've seen before, you could share a flat. This is what you see here. So all the yellow space is the space you share, and the living room is at the river, so it's the best place. The kitchen is a very nice kitchen, but it's in this case, it's on the place where there's the least light. And then these are all flats where people live with the window, so like a street, and they have a bit more comfort. They wanted this comfort, so they have a small bathroom and a little kitchen. If they can't deal with these people anymore, they can pull back for a while and then come back again. In other cases, like this one, you have people living on 600, 700 square meters, sharing 80 square meters. So they live on they might have just a room for 20 square meter, but they share 80 square meter, but they pay much less, of course, because they only pay a share of the 80. So maybe they pay for 25 square meter, but they live on 100 square meters. So this is the interesting bit about sharing, is that affordability for us doesn't mean necessarily to not make architecture anymore because you have no more money, but to really think about new ways of living. And this is a kitchen in the beginning. It has been changed completely. since the beginning, because with the living together, and this is our title, you also have to adjust to the way how you want to live together. And this is my final view of the of where they sit and share and where they live together. Very nice place. And I would now stop the sharing and hand over to Christian. So let's see how I do this. I just have to see time ban. Okay.
Yeah. Christian can share his screen as well. Is he still there?
Christian?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Great.
Fantastic. So I will try to share my screen. And if everything works, you'll see my screen now.
Yep, it works.
Fantastic. So, right. So I will take a bird's eye view, a little bit of what Florian has just shown you, and have another take on how to develop projects or to conduct architecture. And I'm going to talk about something we'd like to call public-civic partnerships, and I will explain shortly what we think it means by showing you two projects. Both of these projects have been shown in Seoul, which we are quite happy about and proud about. One is our own project, and we showed it in the Biennale in 2017. And in 2019, we showed another project, which we are not directly involved in, but we did do the exhibition in Seoul. So public-civic partnerships, in order to dive into the project, I want to go a step back and look at the works of Alexander von Humboldt. He's a natural scientist of the 18th century from Berlin. The reason why he's so celebrated again today is he was born 250 years ago, is that he was probably the first climate activist ever. He was traveling extensively in South America, later also in Russia, and he was among the first ones to see the effects of extensive agriculture and the dangers associated with it. At the time, it was mainly erosion, and at the time he already predicted the collapse of this type of architecture, and he was very much against the exploitation of natural resources. So, which was quite uncommon at the time, or it was unheard of at the time, that we don't have to exploit the natural resources, we have to nurture them. And his main, one of his questions was, how do we nurture these natural resources? Now, in architecture, what is really astounding is that we deal with all natural resources. We have to deal with climate, we deal with water, we deal with air and air pollution in the end also, through building, and with our houses we deal also with energy, and we deal with a very precious resource, which is land. So land is the natural resource that is the basis of all buildings, of course, And so that's why it's very important to understand how the resource land is used in building and in architecture in order to find out how we deal with it. Actually, today there are three ways of dealing with land. So either land can be privately owned, it can be publicly owned, or it can be a shared resource. So each of these types of uses of land has its advantages and drawbacks. So privately owned land has the advantage that the responsibilities of dealing land and the possibilities of developing it are very well regulated in private contracts. So it's private properties. This is private property is something which has developed over many centuries, and it's now heavily codified virtually everywhere in the world. And it's also very easy to make international transfers in private property and to have very complicated and big projects that are dealt with on a private basis. The drawback of private ownership can be that if land becomes scarce, that there is a concentration effect, and land that is scarce becomes more and more expensive as more and more capital concentrates on specific types of land, for example, in the centers of cities, and it becomes unaffordable to parts of the population. On the other hand, we have public ownership. Public ownership, so that means that the state takes care of the natural resources of land. It's the state that plans, it's the state that is dealing with building projects always. Over the years, it has been found that the state can be a very bad manager because he's too far away from the needs of the specific needs of people at specific moments in time, and also at specific locations. Also, there are other problems which deal with corruption as well, where the state might be corrupted, so neglect is really a problem. And there's a third possibility, which is a shared resource. In contrast to private and public ownership, shared resources are not heavily codified. So we don't have a lot of law codes that deal with shared resources. What is a shared resource? A shared resource is I mean, there are many shared resources that we don't think of. For example, riverbeds sometimes are shared resources. The air is a shared resource. And land also can be a shared resource. And there have been studies made which started, I think, in the last 20 years. And these studies culminated in a Nobel Prize for Economics given to Elinor Ostrom for studies how these shared resources can be governed. And this is something that has been then brought to the development also of specific plots in cities. As these type of resources are very difficult to govern, they become projects that are interesting but difficult to manage. Why are they interesting? Because they don't have the difficulty of they don't have the drawbacks of inequality or neglect that private or public ownership can entail. And so I will go right into one of them, the one that Florian has also shown before. That's the Prinzessinnengarten in Kreuzberg. And this is also a type of land which was owned by the government, but it was completely neglected. And because the land was neglected, it was given to a couple of let's say urban activists who started to do something with it, and they made a garden out of it. That's one project. The other project is a huge building conglomerate, let's say, right in the center of Berlin, which is called the House of Statistics, and it used to be the Central Statistical Office of the GDR. When the GDR disappeared after the reunification of Germany, these buildings had no more purpose, and they stood empty from 1990 until today. And in the 2010s, so it has been decided for a long time that they should be raised, but in the 2010s, they started to be in opposition against the fact that these buildings should be torn down and rebuilt, because in the center of Berlin, there started to be, due to concentration effects, there started to be a lack of space. Before, Berlin had always a lot of space for artists and alternative uses, and they started to become scarce. And there were also, in this case, activists who were interested in taking over this building to give it to alternative users. So these are the two buildings I would like to show you a little bit more in detail. This is again the Prinzessinnengarten. This is a picture of how it looked like before something was done. So it's a completely neglected wasteland in the middle of Berlin. It was then turned into this urban garden. And one of the principles, and that's important, and that's why I talked in the beginning of the idea of how can we share the natural resource land, is that it was a completely open idea of using this land. So the urban garden was open to the public. Everybody could use the space and participate in the gardening process. And that was part of the success of this enterprise. On the other hand, it was always been seen as a temporary project, and the question for the people who were the gardeners, were the people who dealt with the project, was always how can we make it sustainable in the long term. The House of Statistics has, of course, the same question. You see here a picture of one of the offices, how they looked like after the bureaucrats of the GDR has left. So there's a lot of potential, but of course there's also the question is how do you govern the space? How do you make it economically viable, and what could be the economic structure that deals with the distribution of the available space? For the House of Statistics, the beginning was a demonstration in front and an illegal billboard on the facade. So a group of activists came together, and they just said that these spaces are free to let for art, culture, and social affairs. That's what the billboard says. And then there started a big row. The police arrived, and this was the beginning of negotiations. And in the end of these negotiations, the city said, "Okay, we're not going to raise these buildings. We're going to look for another solution." Back to the garden, there was a similar question, because, as I said before, it was a temporary project, and their discussion also started: how can this project become a long-term solution for this land? And in order to engage into this discussion, we proposed, Florian and I, as Quest, proposed to erect a participatory vertical garden to make the statement that this land is, as so to speak, a common land, and has a long-term viable impact on the city, and needs to stay there. And this would also be the space to create also space so that these negotiations between the local communities and the city can take place. So it was also introduced as an alternative model of building in a participatory way. And we proposed this structure, which we discussed then with the community and the garden. And it was designed by us, but it has been developed out of specific principles that are part of this idea of sharing resources. This principle where we wanted it to be modular, we wanted it to be flexible and changeable. It should be transparent. It should not hurt the garden, but make a connection between the garden and the city. It should be possible to have it built by laymen. We didn't want to use machines, because we were in a garden environment, and there couldn't be, it was impossible to have a building site in the garden. And out of these discussions, this model was the result. Initially, we started to build it. So we didn't use any big machines. So we in order to build this structure, we had 10-meter high beams, which we brought by hand to the building site, and erected it on the site. Here you can also see how this structure is connecting to the city. And then in the last phase, we started to have it, make it green. We started to make it green, and that was also the beginning of the many discussions that happened there. At the House of Statistics, these discussions were more formal. So here we have a roundtable discussion with local politicians and activists, and also architects and developers. And in the House of Statistics, as it's a very big project, they used different formats of discussions. So there you see a workshop, but they also had civic forums where there are more than 500 people, not only from the neighborhood, but from all of Berlin, to discuss the future of the building. And the output of all this discussion at the House of Statistics was that they decided to create a five-way partnership called CORE 5, in which the city of Berlin collaborated with the local district of Berlin, Bezirksamt Mitte von Berlin, with the local real estate management company, and a housing as a communal housing estate company. And all these official bodies collaborated as a fifth member with the former activists, that in order to develop the site with these other parties, they created a development cooperative. So this was, when I talked in the beginning, it's very difficult. So it's interesting to show this process also, in order to show you that because this has not been done before, there is no easy way to find a way to contract this relationship. So in order to contract the relationship between the official bodies and the initiatives and activists, they chose the cooperative. But there might be other solutions. On the other hand, for example, at the garden, this negotiation process is going on at the moment, and these relationships have not been defined yet. Maybe to finish off, I would like to show you where the House of Statistics stands now, because this was the negotiation process at the beginning. Out of it came a competition, but it was a competition of a different kind, because they decided to make a sort of workshop competition. So they invited several offices to work with the partnership and also members of the civil society to define a master plan. Also, they didn't want to call it master plan. So it's not a master plan, but it does more or less the same thing. And so of course it's a very complex project with over 50,000 square meters of built space. But in order to restructure this whole complex, they decided to not to make it one-dimensionally and unstructured, but to have multi-layered, multi-dimensional, and very many open spaces in order to accommodate these different uses that will be in the future part of this project, which will include experimental housing, social housing, activities for artists. I think there will be maker studios there, experimental design practices as well. There will be a local town hall, so many different uses. So in order to accommodate a program so diverse and complex, it needs a very robust structure. So here I show you another sketch from this workshop competition, where you can see that the interest is really that there is sort of transparency, that this block is not so monolithic anymore, that there are different courtyards, and there is an engagement with the surroundings. And just to finish the presentation, I want to give you a view from the top of the House of Statistics into Berlin. So you can see it's right in the center. You can see the TV tower, and where it was written normally House of Statistics at the top of the building, they now have changed the letterings, and what they say is everything will be different. And with that, I'm going to close my presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, both of you, Florian and Christian. And it's a shame that we can't see the installation anymore, that it was present here, but our current students weren't able to see it, but the previous semester they got to see it. To give a broader context of what they're talking about, is the House of Statistics, which is a huge monumental building in the middle of Berlin that has this heavy history to it. So do you tear it down because of its heavy history, or do you maintain it because it's already a large infrastructure that's already in place there, so you could reuse it, right? So it raises a lot of polemics. And I think overall, yeah, all your projects raise all these type of polemics of new typologies, new possibilities that you can create through collaboration, by proposing new means of living together. So yeah, I really enjoy everything, and I want to open it up for questions from our audience at home or wherever you are, or our audience over here, right? Any questions? Because if not, I'll start with Fabricio.
Yes, hello. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe it's on the camera. I don't know. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentations. That was actually quite interesting. I want to ask you to Mr. Köhl. Is the apartment you showed us in the first project the one which has this boat canopy, like where people can access like the spray with a boat? Is that the building there? I remember that because
yes,
I remember that we visited.
Have you been there?
Yeah, because having studied at the Hafenzied University in Hamburg, we went there with a professor from EV. So I was wondering if it was the same project, Christoph Heinemann, maybe you know him. But I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, just two, I'll be short. The question was about sustainability, because I saw that you collaborated with different kind of architects. And there was, of course, the concept of having, for example, components such as windows defined according to the passive house standard, right? My question to you here is, since this project is a collaborative project, which involves, of course, the users, the people who live there, how important is the program of users in terms of sustainability? Let's say, for example, reuse of the rooftop as a urban garden, recycling, use of lower energy consumption. So it's an active intervention from the user. Compared with the technical solutions, for example, like the use of a component which allow to reduce the U value of the building, or so how do you think these two kind of active and technological elements compenetrate each other? I would say, is the intervention of users a component, a very important component of the sustainability of architecture that you could, for example, witness in the process of design development?
That's a very complex and very interesting question that is hard to answer. I think in this case, in the project of the Spreefeld and also the other buildings we did, the question of sustainability in terms of technology, but also in terms of space size, of sharing things, of these, for instance, these optional spaces as a curatoring space, as an offer to the city, but also as a sort of economical model of economy on a long term, but also maybe the model of the cooperation, as you see in the last project. Now, the two first projects are owned by the clients, but the last project is not owned by the client. So there's also an idea about keeping it out of the market. These are all ideas about long-term, either sustainability in terms of material use, in terms of space use, in terms of energy consumption, but also in terms of being part of another economy. So I guess in the project Spreefeld, people really wanted this as a sort of, they did this by purpose. In other projects, you can offer it and maybe people use it or not. It's a bit, it depends.
Okay.
Can I comment on quick criticism, because I also see sustainability in the sense of producing a 24-hour building. So you're reducing the carbon footprint by maximizing the use of a building. You're like the one that you commented, that there's the 3 buildings with the courtyard, and then you have the kindergarten and the workshop and offices and living, and after work, then it becomes a public space for engagement. So I think it's that life cycle of activity, that the buildings are used 24 hours rather than just having a monocultured apartment building that you just go there to sleep and then most of the day is unused, or the building is mostly unused. I think that's a huge change that you guys are proposing, I think.
I guess so. I think we are really thinking about flexibility of space. Also, in terms of the first project I showed, you can take out a stair and then you can make the space half. So we are now, I'm living in this place after 10 years. We are now at this edge where kids leave the house and we don't need all the space anymore. So it's also about changing space in size, but also changing space of use. I mean, that has been a topic for all the time. I know architecture flexibility. A lot of these things never work. Like you can change walls and they never change it. But in this case, we then said, okay, let's offer very different types of sizes of flats that you could just move between flats.
And I would say even in the adaptive reuse approach of the city. So like even in the 2 projects that you showed at the end, the House of Statistics, of taking this approach of let's reuse what's already there, no matter even if it has a heavy history or not, regardless of the history, it's a built structure that could house hundreds of people if we reuse it, and it could become something better for the city. So instead of tearing it down, why don't we take an approach of adaptive reuse? So I think that engagement is also somewhat of a sustainable agenda. I mean, you could call it that way, I guess.
That's maybe something. Christian, is he still there? I can't see everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
I'm just looking at the numbers here for the House of Statistics, and so it's interesting. So there are 30,000 square meters of ground.
Yeah, 30,000 square meters is quite a lot to get rid of.
And
so they have 90,000 square meters of built space at the moment. But what they are going to do is they will keep 35,000 square meters, and the rest will be newly built. So there will be there is a trade-off, and I think that's also interesting because they don't say that dogma. You don't say, no, this building is there, everything's good, we have to keep the whole building. They say, no, what works, what doesn't work. And this is also part of the negotiation process. So it's what is interesting. It's not only like a social enterprise, and it's not only a civic society project, but it's really an architectural project because you have to find out what works, what doesn't, what kind of space, what's the best use of space, and how do you architecture it.
I had a question about like the earlier projects as well, in terms of the collaboration that you got from the, I would say, clients or the people that were going to be living there, that they became collaborators in trying out like the kitchen bathroom that you were showing, that you can open the one side and then it becomes part of the kitchen or it's a bathroom. How did that come about? Like, did you find like a consortium of people that would help you put the project together, or it just happened that the people that were interested in the project were also open to new ideas?
I think the first project is a pretty exceptional project because we bought the site 2003, and 2000 took us 2 years to design it because I was teaching as well, and then we tried to find people, and we couldn't find any people because the market was completely on the bottom. So we had to really look for people that would maybe, almost everyone I knew would say, I can stay in these kind of old apartment buildings. They are cheap and they are easy to change and we know how they work. And I don't want any design, because most of them were artists. And they said, I don't want to get a design. I don't need a design. I don't want to live in a new building. So it's really funny. So I thought, okay, what could I offer to them that is becoming somehow is a structure, and at the same time it has a strong architecture, but it also becomes theirs. And so then they became quite interested in it, and then we said, okay, whatever we can come up with, let's do it. And so this collaboration in this case was a very interesting one. You're not always lucky to have people that are so that it becomes so much like maybe a shared authorship. In other cases, I would say we were mainly designing it. Yeah.
Great. Maybe other questions from the audience so that I don't monopolize this conversation.
This is a shy audience behind you.
Well, yeah. I have the Hanyang audience over here, and then there's 30 online. So, but maybe when they're live, they're more shy. So.
Hello, come on, ask questions.
They're currently working on these. They're currently working on a co-housing project, so that's why I thought it was interesting that you guys would talk. But the shyness here. About Fabricio, you had a second question that you didn't get to ask.
Yes, absolutely. If anybody else doesn't have any question, I would go with my second one. Let's speak about the transferability, okay? So how do we take this model from Germany and we try to apply it in Korea? Because, I mean, if you look at the model in Germany, it's really like the result of a cultural development. Like for Maximilian von Humboldt, you have also, of course, the fact that Sozialwohngemeinschaften are the evolution of Wohngemeinschaften. So the place where, for example, in the 60s or the 70s, many people lived in the same apartment, and they created this kind of collaborative like process, which developed then in a further autonomous development of a building for living together. So, for example, urban gardening is also the evolution of Kleingarten. So there's small parcels of gardens that you can find overall in all Germany, and which people have like this entire, let's say, landscape parcels which are divided in sub-parcels, which is the small gardens. So this is quite like, you know, the result is quite, let's say, it's a process of development. At the end, you come to the process where you can have like this situation where people get together to finance their own, let's say, their own building, residential and mixed city. How do we do this in Korea? And particularly, how do you think that the architect and of course the economist as well as a moderator between users can initiate this process? Even if the cultural background is not, let's say, so fertile like in Germany, can you as an architect, let's say, take into account the multiple stakeholders and go to them with a proposal so that you can activate them? Because it's easy in Germany, but it's more complicated in Korea, where there's like more hierarchical structures. There is a more, let's say, community, yes, but not really like communitarian in the sense of egalitarian, but more like, like a structure very clear that regulates like what kind of processes are developed. So how do you do this as an architect? How do you start this process?
Well, first maybe a caveat, because you rightly draw this history in Germany, but you also have to recognize that there are ebbs and flows. No, there were times in Germany where there are, let's say, very different types of living together, so to speak. So, and I think that's true for. I think that's a universal trait. I think maybe you're surely right that Korea is very different than Germany. But what was interesting also when they started to look at these shared resources from an economic standpoint, and they made this research into the commons, and it was the work of Elinor Ostrom. They found that there are examples of this in practically every culture. So it's true for Africa, it's true for Asian, and even more so in traditional communities. So it's something that speaks to the human, speaks to the human condition in a way. And Florian surely also has to say something about the role of the architect, but I think, of course, you cannot initiate it as an architect, but you can. What you can always do is to strengthen things that are there, and make them come out. I think that's a role the architect can and probably also must take in this environment. Florian.
But I guess I have to disagree in one point with you, that of course we did initiate it. So more or less all the first 200 Baugemeinschaften have been mainly initiated by architects. But the question is this what comes first, the project or the culture for it? I think, and I agree with Christian, that when we started it, there was no way that we would even find a newspaper where we could offer it, because there was not even a sort of format for it. We had to, in a way, also start. And what makes it easy is you always have a project. The thing you discuss is a project. It's a real thing. It's not something you just talk about. It's a thing. You say, okay, we have a piece of land, and this is our idea about it. And that makes people to think to, okay, what could it be? It could be something I take part. And so I think I agree with Christian, it could happen in any culture. Also the commons that you talked about are more like something which had a very specific use. In the city, the commons are very different. And so the building can become a sort of maybe a topic you can share, and maybe also become a sort of small commons or something.
Yeah, I would agree also with that the idea of sharing communities or how did you call it? Well, anyway, that this happens in every culture around the world. And if we focus on Korea, there is the multi-generational living, which is one type of co-housing. There is the contemporary way of, let's say, the individual, young professional, students as well, sharing apartments because of the price. Just the economics of the city make people have to share also because of expenses. So I think it for the architect, it would be about finding where those sharing conditions happen and then propose the spatial solution for it. But I think you could probably find it everywhere in the world.
Yes, I think so.
Any other questions from the audience? Anybody from, let's see, I might call out on somebody. Any comments, questions regarding your own co-housing projects? No? Okay. Well, yeah, if there's no further questions, I'll just say some final remarks that, again, I am very thankful that you guys could join us and that this has been a positive outcome of this pandemic. And it is a shame that this group of students weren't able to see the installation that you guys did. That's something that I forgot to mention as well, that I know Christian and Florian from the 2019 Seoul Biennale, but they also participated in 2017 Biennale. And in the 2019, they were part of the Cities exhibition. And that's where they presented the household statistics project. And yeah, it was a pleasure to meet you guys in live. And I think this is one good thing that has come out of this thing, that we can maintain this communication across boundaries. So thank you again. And it's been recorded, so we can share again with your students and with all the other Hanyang students that had classes at the same time and couldn't join. So it will stay recorded forever, and we can share. So thank you again, and hopefully we can maintain this.
Yes, we should. We should. It's an interesting way. Okay, Rafael, thank you as well, and Fabrizio.
Thank you.
So we meet again, hopefully soon, and enjoy your rest of your studio time making really interesting projects.
I hope so. I hope they come out.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. You're good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
One last step.